My name is Maria Victoria Abreu. I'm the program manager here in GFDD, and today we want to welcome you all to this book launch and discussion on the Dominican Republic and China, exchange, trade, and investment. Under the series Research and Ideas, GFDD is launching the book Dominican Republic and China, Exchange, Trade, and Investment, in which researcher Yuan Li, to my left, demonstrates through data and analysis the extent of Chinese economic influence in the Dominican Republic, including trade relationships, economic activity of the Chinese diaspora in the country, foreign direct investment, and policy recommendations to maximize the benefits of these relationships. Ms. Li conducted this research while on the GFDD Fellows Program. The Fellows Program is an extension of our internship and academic exchange program, InterDom, who was developed in 2009 to respond to the desire of GFDD and Funglode to develop a community of scholars that contributes to the Foundation's growing body of research on matters of international concern that directly impact the Dominican Republic. The program complements the overall mission of GFDD Funglode to promote academic exchange, generate scholarships, and influence the creation of public policy related to economic development, social development, both at the national and international levels. Through the Fellows Program, GFDD and Funglode seek to generate scholarship on issues at the forefront of the United Nations agenda in order to give voice to national and regional concerns and offer viable solutions to domestic and international challenges. I have here with us today Ms. Yuan Li, the researcher. She is a young professional in the field of international development. Her work focuses on the areas of development finance, governance, and South-South cooperation, with regional orientation towards Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa. She has conducted research projects in various countries in Africa and Latin America, analyzing the economic and political engagement of China in these regions. She currently works at the Inter-American Development Bank on institutional capacity strengthening and promoting good governance in Latin America and the Caribbean. She holds a master's degree in international development and international economics from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She received her bachelor's degree in public policy and administration from Renmin University of China. She is fluent in Chinese, English, and Spanish. And to her left, we have here with us Margaret Myers. Is the director of the China and Latin American program at the Inter-American Dialogue. She established the Dialogue's China and Latin America Working Group in 2011 to examine China's growing presence in Latin America and the Caribbean. Myers also developed the China-Latin American Finance Database, the only publicly available source of empirical data on Chinese lending to Latin America in cooperation with the Boston University's Global Economic Initiative, and she will be commenting Ms. Li's presentation. Let me just give the microphone to Ms. Yuan Li, so you can.
Okay, thank you, Maria Victoria. It's very nice setting that we can all hear each other without having to use the microphone. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yuan Li, and I was a research fellow with Funglode in the fall of 2013, where I did the research on Chinese economic impact in the Dominican Republic. And well, thank you all for taking your precious lunch break time and come here and join us in this discussion of this topic, which is in the publication you see here. Very beautiful graphic design. And I want to buy like 10 copies right away. So I'm very happy and excited to share it with you some of my findings. And this publication, I think, is one of the few that is focused specifically on the China and Dominican Republic relations in the community of the China-LAC research world. And the information we have in this book is collected by first-hand field interview in the country when I was there during 2013. So let me begin by expressing my very sincere gratitude to Funglode and for allowing me to utilize its extended network in the public sector and in academia that supported this research. And also the many thanks for the very talented and multilingual staff members who has given me enormous support in materializing this project and publishing this report. Especially thanks to Reina, Mandy, Reina, Maria Victoria, Miriam, and Lodier, who were the crew that helped me the most throughout this process, as well as the amazing publishing team, Natasha, Semiramis, Jasna, and Maria, for this report. And I would also like to thank Margaret, who's here today. She was my inspiration to enter into the LAC China research world, and which opened many doors for me afterwards. And she was also a very strong support for me in the first place to take this fellowship opportunity. So thanks again for all the encouragement. Also, I was just looking at us and realizing that I worked with a team of great women, and here I am in a panel with all women panelists. So I was reading last week a blog about how in the academic world there is a very focused, there's a very imbalanced gender issue in the academic world, where you go to events and you see all male panels. And so here today I was feeling like the reverse gender inequality.
We're changing that.
Yeah. So which is very nice, and I'm very glad to see that Finglode is empowering women. Okay, so now let's talk about this book. So before I get into the topics, I want to share with everyone how I got this interest in the LAC in China and Dominican Republic. When I started in this field, I realized that there's a lot of focus on China with countries in South America. These are the topics you would see if you Google China LAC. You'll see China Brazil, China Mexico, Venezuela, China Chile, and they have very in-depth and good analysis, but there is a missing component of the China Caribbean. And on the other hand, there are a handful of countries that do not have diplomatic relations with China. So I was starting to think what is happening on the ground of Chinese impact with those countries, and is the pattern of the impact similar or different from that with the countries in South America, or what can be done to further strengthen this relationship? With these questions, so I encountered this research fellowship, and here I'm going to share with you first the key findings. The key findings are, first, Chinese influence in Dominican society is significant. You can see the presence of China in the daily life of Dominican people. And in general, the Dominican people are very aware of the Chinese immigrants and the presence, and they acknowledge the value of their activities in the society. However, this kind of the positive opinion is changing with the recent flow of the new immigrants. The second point is that the Dominican Republic and China economic relations in some ways resembles the commodity-centered relation model between China and the resource-rich South American countries, which is this China-South American countries is often explained by the concept of complementarity. Although the Dominican Republic is not a resource-rich country, you see the relations reflected in their trade profile. It's still a commodity, mineral, raw material versus, on the other hand, in exchange of manufactured goods. However, you begin to see more diversity in the exports from Dominican Republic to China with the effort of trade promotions by both sides. The third point is that the large-scale Chinese investment is hard to materialize, mainly because of the lack of diplomatic relations. But on the other hand, market size, information asymmetry, and energy constraints are also the main obstacles for Chinese investment. And our last point is that the Chinese Dominicans are the entrepreneurial group of minorities in the country, and there is a great potential, I think, to enhance the China-Dominican relations and linkages through the Chinese diaspora. And next, let's look at each of these findings with some details. First, about the general presence of China. In Dominican Republic, you will find Chinese products almost everywhere, from like basic clothing, daily supplies, to vehicles, machineries. And not only do the Chinese product arrive the faraway country, Chinese people also came and presents a very significant group. There's estimates to have 50,000 Chinese immigrants in the country now, which majority of them came during the last 5 to 10 years, and most of them living on some sort of small businesses. For example, you can easily find a Chinese-owned restaurant in Dominican Republic, not only in the capital, but also if you go to like Santiago, you go to the coast, you'll still see these Chinese-owned restaurants. What I find very interesting is that in Dominican Republic, the Chinese-owned restaurants do not serve Chinese food, not like you see in like
Pica pollo?
Chile. Yes, exactly. Like they serve Dominican food. They serve pica pollo, they serve tostones, chicharrones. So it's very different. Like I was it caught my eye like right away when I saw, oh, you're Chinese and you're cooking Dominican food. Cool. And on the other hand, for the Dominicans, I find it's a general trend that when I ask someone, like just an ordinary Dominican person, what they know about China, they can tell you pretty much what the type of the business the Chinese people have, and they will tell you that there's a Chinatown, which is also very nice because for a country that does not even have relations with China, and there's a Chinatown, very clean, very organized, and very vibrant business going on in there. And also the good observation is that although it's like mostly Chinese-owned business in Chinatown, the customers are the local Dominicans. They went there to buy groceries, to eat, to buy supplies. And we also see that the Dominicans, Chinese have had some leadership roles in the society. For example, Miss Rosa N.G., who is now served as the Dominican trade representative in China. She's a very prominent Chinese Dominican that has worked in politics for a long time. And so when I ask the people what the perceptions are, they generally have a positive attitude and recognize like the hard work ethics of the Chinese people. And yeah, excuse me.
Okay.
When it comes to trade, we have seen some very impressive growth over the past 10 years. In fact, that China is now a major trading partner with Dominican Republic. It is the second largest source of imports, which accounts for 10.4% of the total Dominican import. And it's the third largest destination of export that accounts for 5.4% of the total export from Dominican Republic. And for China, DR is also a very good trading partner in the Caribbean. It's the third largest, ranks after Cuba and Puerto Rico. And the 14th of all the LAC countries and territories for China. By 2012, the bilateral trade has grown 37 times, comparing that at the beginning of 2000. And separately, the Dominican import from China grew 26 times, and the Dominican export to China grew 1,800 times. This graph here shows this tremendous growth pattern that we have observed over the past decade. However, we need to note that the data here ends in 2012. When I was checking a little bit more recent data, I noted that in 2013, Dominican export to China actually shrank, while the Dominican import from China still keeps growing. So here I think it will be interesting to see what the performance is for 2014 and 2015 because what I said earlier, the Chinese mainly import the minerals and raw materials from the country, and with this slowing down of China, how is that affecting the trade performance for the Dominican export? I think that remains to be an interesting question to look at. On the other hand of this quantity growth, we see the diversity growing, actually also making progress. Starting from the end of last year, for the first time, China imported tobacco from Dominican Republic. This required a lot of effort of negotiating with the Chinese regulators because we had like some sort of quota and constraints on where the tobacco can come from. But this hadn't made fruitful advance. That now we're importing tobacco from the Dominican Republic. And some specialty products from the country, I think, also had very big potentials in the consumer market of China, like the precious stones, the blue amber, the rum, and cigars, which are all going to the consumption market that is not experiencing this slowing down that China is currently experiencing in the construction sector or in the heavy industry sector. So, next slide. We also need to look at this kind of the competition of trade from another lens. So, although you see this tremendous growth, we see that a big imbalance of the trade. Dominican Republic runs a big trade deficit with China, and the value of import accounts for the value of export only accounts for about 40% of the value of their import from China. And in 2013, this deficit grew larger. And the large influx of the Chinese goods have caused some conflict with the local vendors. Earlier in 2013, there was like a protest of local vendors against the Chinese traders, accusing them of dumping cheap Chinese garment and daily supplies without paying proper tax. This caused some regulation tightening for Chinese import, which affected the efficiency of the import in general for other like more formal exchanges. Another issue we saw was the competition in the textile industry, in particular of the Dominican textile versus the Chinese textile. This is a graph of the textile production and export in the zonas francas, in the free trade zones of the Dominican Republic. And you saw there's a big drop from 2013 to 2012. The size shrank to almost half. And this claims to be because since the United States lifted the textile quota, the Chinese textile became more competitive, and which squeezed the Dominican export of textile. So I think that's another aspect that has, because of the Chinese impact, that it has affected the Dominican economy in their free trade zone. But I think this also has something to do with this changing of upgrading the type of manufacturing industry in the free trade zones. Because recently we saw that the free trade zones start to have more pharmaceutical products and more like value-added products being processed in there. So I think it's natural also that textile is going down. But China was also a big factor in this drop. Next one, let's look at tourism. Tourism, this graph shows to you how Chinese tourism has a very marginal portion in the total tourism industry. So the blue bars are the Chinese tourists, comparing with the total bar is all the Asian tourists that came to Dominican Republic each year. We have seen some good growth, like from 3 digits to 4 digits, but still comparatively, you saw it's very marginal I think this is due to mostly because it's very far, it's time consuming, cost is high, and information is very insufficient. Like, you have hardly had any Chinese people heard of this country, despite it's very beautiful and it has very rich tourism resource as an island that can not only offer you beach, but it can also you mountains, lakes, waterfalls, and a handful of like excursion outdoor activities. But I think this is, but the effort is being made in tourism promotion, led by the Ministry of Tourism and the Trade Office in China. They have like actively participated in trade expos in China to promote the country, and working with some local agencies and consulting firms to try to work out like a strategy of how to make this more available to the Chinese people. But a big a constraint here is that because of the lack of the diplomatic relations, Chinese tourism agencies cannot publicly promote Dominican Republic as a package, like as an option. They have to work out some other ways through more of the private side or some other strategies. But the good news is that now visa has becoming a less of a concern. Now with U.S. visa, Canadian visa, or UK Schengen visa, the Chinese tourists will not need a Dominican visa to China. I think this gives space for a lot of Chinese expats in like U.S., in North America, or in Europe to travel there, which would be a more I think fit target group for this tourism promotion. Next one, let's look at investment and financing. I think here we need to separate the two big players, two big Chinese players. One is Taiwan and one is the mainland. Taiwan has been the traditional strong investment and financing source and partner with Dominican Republic due to its diplomacy of helping its allied countries. So allied countries being the countries that recognize them. And for Taiwan, Dominican Republic is one of the most stable and best developing economies of all their allied countries. So traditionally, Taiwan has given a lot of emphasis to Dominican Republic. Many investment and donations have been seen in particularly the technology, science and technology sector. There's the Cyber Park of Santo Domingo, there's the Institute of Technology, what is the full name? Institute of Technology of the Americas, ITLA. Yeah. Also, both of these projects are financed by Taiwanese financing. And Taiwan has also established numerous training centers throughout the country on teaching technology, teaching using machinery, equipment, and they have also offered a lot of scholarship and exchanges to bringing Taiwanese experts to teach in the Dominican Republic, and also to bring Dominican students and experts to further their knowledge in Taiwan. Which I think this is very good for the country to, boom up its technological knowledge. On the other hand, for the mainland, very few large-scale investment has been seen in the Dominican Republic. As I said earlier, because of lack of diplomatic relations, the Chinese policy banks cannot provide credit or guarantee or any form of partnership with the Dominican Republic that gives a lot of limitation for Chinese companies to invest. However, we have seen several attempts by the Chinese state-owned enterprise to try to seek some sort of investment opportunities in energy sector and in tourism. But unfortunately, those deals never materialized because of lack of information and not very familiar with the local business partners, and also lack of due diligence. So, but I think the message here is that they are interested, and they want to spend on their global operations in the Dominican Republic. And I think more and more countries have realized that the Dominican Republic is a very good business partner in the Caribbean. It has stable economy, it's more open to investors, and the regulations are better laid out, and it's a market economy. And so I have seen companies that move their operation from Cuba to Dominican Republic because they find that in this environment it's easier for them to sustain. Otherwise, in Cuba it's more like a planned economy, they have to be constrained by the government. So with more experience accumulated and more business, and I think there are going to be more knowledge about how to do business in Dominican Republic, and have a better idea for them, like this is a good country to do investment in the Caribbean. On the infrastructure side, we have seen some Chinese companies working there as EPC contractors. So they won contracts by the international bidding process, and they working to build like a turnkey project, like a cement factory or a production line. And that has been going on for a while, and I think it's a good starting point to have actual Chinese companies operating in the sort of the construction sector. And I think an advantage of Dominican Republic for China is that first the business environment, and also importantly the labor supply. I have interviewed many companies and Chinese companies, and they've been all telling me that they're very satisfied with the labor supply there, that they can find skilled labor, unskilled labor, any kind of the need that they want, the Dominican labor market can meet their needs. So I think this is also an advantage over other Caribbean countries. And the disadvantage is that the lack of information and experience, which we have seen in those attempts to invest by the state-owned enterprise. Next one, let's take a look at the Dominicans in the country. I have said that it's a big group, 50,000 Chinese immigrants, and that accounts for about 0.5% of the total population. And to give a comparison, the Chinese immigrants in Chile has only 20,000. And Chile is a country that has a lot more activities with China. So in Dominican Republic, you see more Chinese people. They are the second largest minority groups after Haitians. And I have learned that there are two groups of the Chinese immigrants, the old ones and the new ones. The old ones, first of them came in the 1860s, and throughout the years in the around the 1950s, there came another group of them, and many of them first came to be in Dominican Republic as a stepping point for them to go to North America. But what happened is that a lot of them ended up settling down in Dominican Republic because I have interviewed some families, and they have been telling me that they felt they're better accepted and integrated in the local society than their friends in like US or Canada. In the book, we discuss some of the reasons why they were more accepted. And throughout the years, they have established their family, their connections, and a lot of them advanced, like I said earlier, in different career professions. You saw Chinese Dominican politicians, Chinese Dominican scholars, successful businessmen, who are these old groups, from these old group of immigrants. And another important reason for them to settle is that their kids can grow up with 3 languages skills. So they can speak English, they speak Chinese, and they speak Spanish, which is for them an advantage over like going to North America. I think also I saw a lot of second, third generation Chinese and Dominicans, and they are all very well educated. A lot of them received education abroad in more developed countries, but they came back. They came back and some of them overtook their family's business and started a new business, or they work in the government. So they have a very strong attachment to their home country. And you see this progress through generation of the Chinese Dominicans. So their income goes higher, social status improved, and life is better than their parents. So very, very positive to observe that. On the other hand, in the recent years, you see a large flow of influx of new immigrants who came during the past 5 to 10 years. Some of them came from other European countries because of the Europe slowing down. Their business kind of cannot go on in Europe, so they start to move to other countries, and some of them came here. These people are more kind of closed groups. They are not very willing to integrate, not very willing to communicate. It's even for me, it's very hard to find them. It's not hard to find them, but it's very hard to talk to them. Like, they don't want to tell you too much about why they came, where they came from, or what is our plan, or things like that. And these people remain kind of like the mystery for the local Dominicans. And I think people see them very gathered, like in this street, Duarte. You see all these Chinese shops, and local people also see that, and they kind of start to have this kind of negative suspicion or dissatisfaction with the new immigrants. They're also like the old ones are hardworking, and they tend to like work in the same type of business as their friends, and sometimes you have seen very harsh competitions. First with the Dominican local vendors, not only like in the trading business, but also in the pica pollo. I learned that before them there was Dominican chains, but then they came and they kind of lowered the price. It just squeezed out the Dominican chains, so now there's no Dominican pica pollo. And the same happened to the nail salons. In the nail salons it was worse because they were kind of competing with each other, and then they completely wiped out the profit margin of each other, so the whole industry kind of died, and they moved to pica pollo. And so I think these people, there needs to be some kind of social programs or some social groups that help them to be more integrated and understand them more and have them be more mingled with the society. So in slide. And in conclusion, so I think there's definitely many challenges for both sides to learn better about each other. The challenges are like the distance, the language, different culture, habits, and ethics. Although there has been progress, the starting point is relatively low. I remember like the deputy trade representative from China in DR telling me that his work feels like an entrepreneur because there's not much to build upon. And from the other angle, that this gives both sides a lot of space for improvement of the bilateral relations, and I think there has been a lot of lessons learned, both by China dealing with other developing countries, so they can imply some of that lessons learned in their relations with Dominican Republic. And on the other hand, the Dominican Republic can learn from other Latin American countries in how they've been dealing with China, how they have the problems, how they solve them, how they successfully promoted some of their products to the Chinese market. So there's knowledge there to be utilized by both sides. And then looking ahead, there are two key words. One is mutual understanding. This is something that we see that makes things fail or makes things not happen in many cases. And I think this is also what both governments have realized, and they're trying to make it improve mutual understanding by like establishing trade office, having staff working actively with each side, a partner from each side, to getting people to know more about the products, the environment, the business, and so on. And the other one, I think, is to be strategic. I think the Dominican Republic is a very attractive business partner in the Caribbean for China, with many advantages that other countries do not have. It can be a fair playing ground for the Chinese private investors to expand their global operations. And on the other hand, we have seen, like we've talked before, the manifested interest in large operations and infrastructure deals. And the rich tourism resource and diverse cultural heritage can be better exploited for the Chinese tourists. But promotions has to be done through the right channel and to the right target audience. Commercial exchange can lead to potential establishment of business, especially in technology, that can lead to knowledge spillover and help the country advance in the value chain. And lastly, I think Chinese Dominicans are the diligent, intelligent group, and they're willing to connect back to their origin because they realize the growing impact of China globally, and they want to take the opportunity to be the forefront leader in this relation. I think that can be utilized to generate some fruitful linkages for both sides. When I was in the country, I was fascinated to experience the culture, to learn its history, and to see some of the remarkable progress that the country has achieved. I was even more impressed to see the visible Chinese activities and Chinese impact in the local economy. And the knowledge and understanding of China, there are quite a few, I must say, scholars and businessmen, that people that work closely with China that have very good knowledge about the country and about how the Dominican Republic can be a better partner for China. So I think in China we say that the people are the key for accomplishing an endeavor, and I think here we have the people ready and we have the time, so I think in the future it's going to be a lot more, the relation is going to escalate to the next level. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have Margaret Myers. She is the program director of the China and Latin American program in the Inter-American Dialogue.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm always excited to see what UN is doing. She has so many wonderful projects going on, and this is just one of them. I had the pleasure of working with UN at the Dialogue. I guess it was almost 2.5 years ago, as an intern at that time. A remarkable intern, and I was delighted to hear that she was interested in going to the Dominican Republic to do some research on China's presence there. As she mentioned, this is a topic that is really not covered at all, barely at all at least. There are a couple of things out there, but very, very minimally. I would say, there are thousands of articles on the China-Latin America relationship at this point, China, Latin America, and the Caribbean relationship at this point. But as Yuan also mentioned, most of those focus on South America, or they focus very broadly on sort of macroeconomic relations, trade relations, and other dynamics which are covered in depth, but do not touch on the Caribbean necessarily, which is a very distinct region with respect to China relations, and certainly not on the Dominican Republic in particular. So this is a very, very welcome addition to the literature. As you all may know, I don't think this was mentioned, but Yuan, just before going to the Dominican Republic, went to Chile, Santiago, to research that relationship, and I can't think of a sort of relationship with China that's more different, maybe. Perhaps Brazil, there are a lot. I mean, they're different for different reasons, but it's an extremely different relationship, and so she approached, obviously, her research in the Dominican Republic with a really informed and diverse perspective. And I think that shows in this book. What strikes me in reading the report is that the China-Dominican relationship is both very similar to China's other bilateral relationships in Latin America and the Caribbean, and then also very, very different, even from neighboring countries or nearby countries in the Caribbean. And as Yuan indicated in her presentation, the similarities rather, are really very striking in economic terms more than in anything else. The Dominican Republic runs a trade deficit with China. This is common throughout the entire region, with just a few exceptions. We also see most countries in Latin America and the Caribbean exporting primary commodities to China while importing numerous manufactured goods, and manufactured goods of increasingly high quality. It used to be, really nice plastic goods, and now it's Huawei telephones and Lenovo computers and higher refrigerators and a wide variety of other things. So that is certainly changing somewhat, but the fundamentals remain the same. And the DR the Dominican Republic is not distinctive in this respect. Another similarity, and this is in the book, Yuan didn't mention it explicitly, is were some of the companies that you mentioned entering the Dominican Republic. Companies like Huawei, like ZTE, and certain Chinese car companies. And it strikes me that even in the Caribbean and in the Dominican Republic, these companies have been sort of on the forefront of establishing a Chinese presence there. Huawei has been now in Latin America and the Caribbean for more than a decade, although only last year did they start making a profit. But you see a real commitment to understanding different environments, be it the Dominican Republic or Colombia, where there's very, very little Chinese presence, or Chile, or wherever. Huawei is there and doing a good job in terms of understanding local environments. ZTE too, you see offices everywhere, and then of course Chinese cars are very popular across almost the entire region. Yuan also, of course, does a commendable job, and has done so also in her presentation, of highlighting the distinctive qualities of the China-Dominican relationship. I think the Chinatown thing is really interesting, and I don't know enough about this, having not really studied this in particular, but in a lot of places you see Chinatowns emerging sort of organically over decades or more. But in some countries, like in the Dominican Republic, you see an active effort on the part of China, or Taiwan in this case, to establish a Chinatown. Kind of where perhaps there wasn't, I don't know if there was a Chinese community there before in any organic way or not.
What I learned is that this one, yes, this was a dedicated effort by the foundation that was led by this prominent Chinese Dominican she sort of was the lobbying person in between the Chinese government and the Taiwanese government and the Dominican government to pull fundings from various sources to have this land made available to build the Chinatown. So I think that's definitely an important player. And actually I think they started the foundation in order to lead the Chinatown project, and but she represents also the will, or the collective effort of the Chinese group.
to establish
Yeah.
this. It's almost a promotional sort of, culturally, educational sort of. Yeah, and you see the same thing happening in Costa Rica and a couple of other countries, although it's certainly not something that you see everywhere. And so it's certainly reflective of the presence, I think, of Chinese immigrants or Chinese population already in the Dominican, and one that's well connected. And interest on the part of the Dominican Republic in strengthening ties. Interesting also is this notion that the labor market can meet the needs of Chinese companies. That is not something that you hear very often, and so it's very reflective, I think, of what the Dominican Republic perhaps has to offer, and is a nice thing to hear. You do not hear that when Chinese companies talk about Brazil. You do not hear that when Chinese companies talk about Mexico. It's interesting that was something that came out of these interviews, and encouraging. Immigration, obviously there are Chinese immigrants throughout Latin America, a lot in Central America, some in the Caribbean, many in Brazil and Peru, but their presence and effect on local communities is of course shaped by distinct local conditions. And in the book, Yuan's description of the unique experiences of Chinese Dominicans, she touched on this a little bit, but there's much more there. Their successes, their failures, and their possible role in strengthening China-Dominican Republic relations is especially valuable. So I commend her on that. And then I think of considerable interest here, and with respect to the Dominican Republic and China relations, is this question of Taiwan. It's almost an elephant in the room, and in many cases when we're talking about economic relations, the Taiwan relationship has been, of course, extremely beneficial to the Dominican Republic in previous decades, as it has to many of the partners in the region. But as documented now in several publications, mostly on the Caribbean, Taiwanese assistance to Latin American affiliates, or Taiwan affiliates in Latin America, really pales in comparison to what China has to offer in terms of trade, finance, and investment. And several countries have recognized this economic reality and have expressed some interest in switching their affiliation over the past, I would say, 6 or 7 years. China has been interested in the case of Costa Rica, that actually happened, but for others it hasn't, mostly because of what many call an unofficial diplomatic truce between China and Taiwan at the moment in terms of their activity in Central America, the Caribbean, Africa, and elsewhere. And what you see, I mean, Yuan described a lot of mainland Chinese activity, trade, investment, less in the way of finance from policy banks meaning China Development Bank and China Exim Bank primarily. So certainly there are economic connections, but when you look in comparison to those countries that have diplomatic affiliation with mainland China, it's a lot less. So there is a distinction, even though China is active in Taiwan-affiliated nations in Latin America. So this is, I think, a challenge. We don't quite know what's going to happen in the coming months now. This is a really interesting time for, I think, cross-strait relations, and also possibly for those countries that are affiliated with Taiwan in Latin America. In January, Taiwan will hold its presidential elections, and it's very, very likely at this point that Tsai Ing-wen, who is the candidate that is affiliated with the DPP, which has traditionally been more pro-independence, right, than the KMT, which is right now in power, that she'll win. Most polls are saying that she'll win actually by a lot. And so it's unclear kind of what effect this will have, first of all, on cross-strait relations, but also on, diplomatic competition in, say, the Caribbean or Central America or elsewhere. Many say that she's going to focus purely on sort of domestic challenges, and that's highly likely, but there's a very strong contingent in Taiwan that's very pro-independence, and if they have their way, it could stoke some fires and perhaps have some implications for other regions. So something to look out for, and of course this is always, whenever you're talking China and Taiwan, there's always something that could materialize. To conclude, and I'm not going to take a lot of time because I know there are probably plenty of questions for Yuan, but I would agree with Yuan entirely that relations with China, though still limited, could be quite beneficial for the Dominican Republic. They probably already have been to a considerable degree. Chinese economic engagement, when you look at stories country by country at certain industries, at certain sectors across Latin America, have been transformative. And at times mutually beneficial, which is a term that the Chinese like to use quite a bit, and I think it's accurate in many contexts. Those countries that have benefited the most from Chinese engagement, in my view, to put it very simply, are those that have worked, first of all, to engage the Chinese government and Chinese companies that have almost a cadre of staff working in Beijing on these topics. And that's a luxury for many countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. That have actively promoted inward investment and also value-added export. And this is something that, as Yuan mentioned, the Dominican Republic has made some progress on with specific products, rum and others. But that's something that a lot of countries at this point in Latin America are needing to focus on. And then all of that while maintaining necessary environmental and other standards to make sure that the relationship is in fact win-win and mutually beneficial. Otherwise, there's a win with a capital W and a win with a lowercase w, and you don't want it to be that way. So those are my observations, and I think, according to Yuan's report, that the Dominican Republic is in fact doing a very good job of engaging China to the degree that it can, given these political limitations. So I commend you all on this publication. It's really fantastic and a wonderful contribution to the literature. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Let me open for a couple of questions for Yuan or Margaret. Who has a question? Come on, don't be shy. Angie, you have to have it.
Vamos a dejar que los demás.
Okay, no problem. No pressure. Anyone has any questions? Anyone? Okay, please.
Oh, that's her.
Hola.
Now you all want to talk.
Yeah, this question's for Ms. Li. My name's Germán Tirado. I'm a graduate student at George Washington University. And you mentioned something that really piqued my interest. You mentioned the internal competition between Chinese shops and how that wiped out the profit margin and basically killed the nail salon business. Since you mentioned this transferring over to the local fast food or the pica pollo industry, do you see that trend replicating unless the Dominican government implements some social programs? And what sort of social problems would you suggest that the Dominican government implement?
Do you want to answer one by one or take a
I just want to clarify on the question first.
Okay.
Your question is about social programs towards whom? What kind of social programs?
I believe that you mentioned that the Dominican government would be wise to implement social programs to protect, I'm assuming then, Dominican local food industry.
Okay.
But the first part of the question was, do you see the trend replicating, whereas Dominican local food owners might be run out of business because of the internal and harsh competition that the Chinese suppliers bring?
Do you want to answer? No, take another one.
Yeah.
I'll ask one too.
So first of all, thank you for sharing your insights today with us. My name is Yuan Li, and I'm from the Dominican Republic. And my question is focused on the strategic Dominican-Chinese economic relationship. And what three key areas can we identify to work together strategically to grow investment and trade between these two countries? So what is the value add of the Dominican economy for the Chinese investment. Finally, it's come to my mind, maybe port infrastructure, tourism, information technology. Do you agree?
One more? Or not? Margaret.
I'm just out of curiosity, I don't know if you've looked at this at all, Yuan, but the extent to which in China there is recognition of, first of all, an understanding of the Dominican Republic as a country, and whether Dominican products, any in particular, tend to stand out in Chinese markets. Have you seen anything like that?
So regarding the social programs, I didn't mean to say social programs to protect Dominican industries. I was talking about social programs to help the new Chinese Dominicans to integrate in the society, because I think it's not good to create this tension between the locals and the Chinese, that they are not, that to have this kind of suspicion growing as nobody's talking to each other. So I think there should be a dialogue, some mechanism for communication. That's the type of social program I was referring to. And in terms of the trend of Chinese competitors killing Dominican local industries, I have not seen that in other business, because honestly, I think I have not seen Chinese people tapping into other business. They, like I said, these new people, they like to kind of replicate from one another of their own, but not of the Dominicans. So they are mostly focused on this restaurant business. Nail salon now is less Chinese because they wiped out each other. So and the cabañas business, which I think are the two most outstanding Chinese dominant type of business, and they have not gone to other form of business, and I think they were doing pretty well in these two types. So I don't see that coming to other types, but yeah, what I tried to understand when I was there, when I tried to talk to them, is like how they managed to survive themselves with what they do with the price strategy, and like how long working hours, how do they feel about this to themselves. But I was not very successful in getting to talk with them. So I think this was an area that can be more, can have more effort to really learn what made them successfully themselves with the strategies that can kill other business owners. Like, how can they stand out while others cannot survive in this kind of, it's kind of like a market competition. Both players enter and they do this thing, they do this thing, they compete supposedly on the level playing field, but I don't know if they have sneaky ways or what they do with some to avoid taxation or whatever that made them more able to sustain in the same like marketplace. So yeah, this was the question I was trying to figure out, but was not able to. Yeah.
Second part of the
Yes, I have to be more like a local Dominican talking to them. And for the other questions regarding the some key areas that can be worked strategically, I think tourism has very good potential. I personally think it's a very unique island. Like you have resources that other islands don't have. You see a lot of Chinese people going to Indonesia, going to Thailand to lay on the beach. That shows that they are interested in the beach. And now, instead of in addition to the beach you have in the Dominican Republic, you have the Pico Duarte, you have the Lago Aniquillo, you have the excursions. When I was there, I have not run out of things to do, and I was there 3 months. So I think this has to be communicated to the Chinese tourists, not necessarily of the people in China, but like people like us in the U.S., which has a much closer distance to the country, and are on general like on a better economic conditions than the most people in China, and they don't have visa requirements, and they have time. Students studying, they have long breaks. They can be like more. They need to know more about this country, and I'm sure there will be interest. So I think this can be worked more strategically on. And other things are, I think, Chinese products. Dominican products, like the blue amber. When I was there, I attended a trade expo. So a group of Chinese companies came to the country to showcase their products and seeking business partners. And those people have a huge interest in the blue ambers. Everybody trying to buy a tons to take back. And so I think those kind of specialty that you have needs to be more known in the Chinese market, like including your rum, your cigar, all like good quality stuff and good price, and just need to be known by the people there. They need to have a business partner that can, have the access, have the strategy to promote those things. Yeah, that's the thing that I can think of. Mostly, I can foresee making a huge difference if done strategically. In terms of what is the value of Dominican economy to China, I think, like I said, I think it's a very good partner in the Caribbean, and this is like a proxy to get to other Caribbean markets, and the business environment is relatively stable and open, and there's a lot of Chinese business in Cuba that I can see potentially being transferred to the Dominican Republic. I think the business they seek for benefits, they seek profit, and they seek ease of doing business, and I have seen examples of transferring over to the Dominican Republic because of constraints in Cuba. So I think that can create like a exemplary effect. Like other companies can see, oh, they moved and they're doing much better. Why not we move too? And attracting more of their business, the people in the business world to this country. So I think that is very valuable. And also like the labor that I have, at least for what I have heard from the Chinese partners, the companies, they very much in applause with the Dominican labor force. So this is very good value added for their business. Yes, that's some of that I can think of. And in terms of the Dominican products, I was going to share with you guys this anecdote. My mom yesterday sent me a screenshot of a television shopping program promoting Dominican blue amber. So I think there has been some presence and promotions of Dominican products. But in terms of cigar, I looked into the cigar business because the regulations, currently they cannot import cigars from the Dominican Republic. So that is more like because of policy and regulation constraints, you cannot do it. But I don't see there's no space for eliminating that regulation. So I hope to see Dominican cigars sometime. And there are people working on that actually, not only the trade representatives, but some private cigar business woman who has some chain stores in China. She's very actively seeking to import Dominican cigars. So I think there's business interest and there's customer interest. It just needs a time to make it happen.
Thank you very much. We really enjoyed having you as a fellow. And the publication, the research is really interesting. We promote it to all of you. We want you to read it. It's both in Spanish and in English. We're selling it here. And thank you, Margaret, for being here today. Just thank you for coming. Enjoy lunch if you haven't. And thank you.
Thank you.